Welcome back, everyone. It looks like Trump has a plot to steal the midterms. Let's see what Nick Fuentes says about it.
Our other story, which we'll talk about a little bit tonight, and there's not too much to say about it, but we'll get into this a little bit, and then we'll take a look at the super chats. Our next story for tonight is about the Supreme Court ruling on an executive order from the Trump administration that has to do with mail-in voting. So as you may know, the Trump administration has been pushing very hard for the SAVE Act. And it's hard to even know what is viable here. We could get into the legislative history of it. It's kind of been all over the place. At one point, they were saying the SAVE Act was about nationwide voter ID. And then they were saying it was about transgenders and getting transgender care for children.
And we all know that was just obfuscation, so they could brush it under the rug, create a news story about it, never solve the problem, forget about it, move on to something else.
And then these two things were going to come together in one bill. And then they said they were going to pass it using budget reconciliation, which is sort of impossible for reasons we could get into. And so they had this big legislative push throughout the year. Elon was involved, Trump was involved. And the long and short of it is they're trying to get every state in the country to pass voter ID requirements. And the reason they're doing this is because they know there's going to be a blowout in 2026 for the Democrats. And they've been trying everything in their power. Voter ID through the SAVE Act. They've been trying to do the gerrymandering. They're going to do this midway thing. You know, we're halfway to the next census. And so now they're going to redraw all the districts and try to milk out all the Republican electors that they can, or all the Republican representation they can. They've been doing basically everything in their power now that they're in government to try to keep control of the House. And since all of this has basically failed, many of the states aren't going to redraw the districts, for example. The leadership in the Senate is not going to take up the SAVE Act. They're not going to try to pass it. Now, the Trump administration, in their last-ditch effort, they've passed an executive order to the Department of Homeland Security where they're telling DHS to collect a list of all the eligible voters in the country. They're going to give the list to the post office, and they're going to instruct the post office not to accept ballots from individuals that are not eligible to vote. This is their roundabout scheme that they're going to do through executive orders.
I was going to say, this sounds just like another scheme to draw everything around in a huge circle, obfuscate it yet again, and never solve the problem.
Executive branch of government to try to manipulate voting regulations in the different states. And so obviously, I mean, this doesn't even sound legal or appropriate or right. It's just ridiculous.
It's not legal, or it shouldn't be
It was
legal.
immediately challenged by a federal judge. There's a nationwide injunction.
Our country's never been in this condition to where you would have to, I guess, micromanage things in such a way to where something like that wouldn't have to be legal. People don't have any integrity anymore. There's no integrity, so that's degraded down, however you want to say it.
Against it. This was considered in the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court has not ruled on the actual merits of the executive order, but they simply said that the way the executive order was challenged lacks standing. And so inevitably there's going to be another case where the Supreme Court actually makes a decision, but that's not what this is. And so this is a story from Axios. It says, quote, President Trump can implement an executive order restricting mail-in ballots just months before the midterm elections, said the Supreme Court on Monday. The Supreme Court said in the unsigned order that states lack standing to challenge the executive order because it is an internal directive that doesn't harm the states that sued. But the majority wrote that the administration was likely to suffer irreparable harm from the freeze. The Supreme Court's order reads, quote, this internal directive does not regulate the state's voter registration process, nor does it impinge on the state's authority to create and enforce a legal code for elections. The Federal Appeals Court previously found the order could impose unprecedented levels of involvement by federal officials in how states administer elections and could confuse and disenfranchise voters. The court's disposition of this application does not mean that any measure taken by the government to implement the order will necessarily be lawful, said the court. On that score, only time will tell.
That's the whole purpose of it, is to confuse and disenfranchise the voters.
So in other words, creating the database doesn't injure or even really directly affect the states that sued. So for DHS to create the list theoretically does not have anything to do with the actual voter registration process, which is governed by the state legislatures. The Supreme Court says, however, if the federal government tries to implement other aspects of the executive order, like let's say they try to reject ballots, well, that may necessarily not be lawful. They said, but time will tell. So the article goes on and says the decision did not address whether the administration has the authority to implement the order, said Sotomayor in her dissent. Rather, they argued, quote, today's decision merely postpones adjudication of those challenges. Trump's executive order issued in March of this year directed the Department of Homeland Security to compile a list of citizens eligible to vote and called for the U.S. Postal Service to accept ballots only from voters on those lists, which is ridiculous. So for those that don't know, voting is told by the states. Okay, the states have the authority to control how the votes are collected. It's a state matter. This is in the Constitution. Right. And so it's not up to the federal government. It's up to the states to create these voter databases and do voter registration and set the rules and so on and so forth. And this is why it's trying to create this way around it. They're going to say we'll have DHS, which is an executive department, create the list. They're going to go through with their database, apparently, of all people living within the borders, and they'll find out who's eligible. Then they're going to give the list to the Postal Service, which is another federal department, and they're going to tell the Postal Service to only accept the ballots from people that are eligible to crack down on voter fraud. And that just doesn't even sound right. That doesn't even sound legal. It sounds ridiculous. And who's going to make that determination? Now the post office is going to turn into some kind of voter screening agency. The envelope is going to hit the desk in some kind of post office, and the determination will be made there about which ballots will be mailed in and which ones won't be. It sounds like there's a lot of problems with this. This doesn't even sound legal. It doesn't even sound right. And I think, let's be honest, the Trump administration doesn't even expect that this is going to be upheld. I don't think
they care.
The Trump administration, clearly even they don't think this is correct. What could possibly be the legal theory that the executive branch of government has the authority to do this? They're going to have the letter carriers are going to throw out the ballots. How's that going to work? Who's going to do it? The post office? It doesn't.
I think at the point where everyone's woken up to the entire country is a sham, like not just the voting system, but everything, the entire infrastructure has become so corrupted that voting has become the least of our worries, but a mass portion of the population seem to somehow think we can vote our way out of the big problem, like the big issue.
But what this is about is that, like everything else, like literally everything else in the administration, no one's even really trying here. There's no plan. There's no big idea. Nobody really has any clue what they're...
I think a lot of them did care and did have a plan when they first got into it, figured out it's all a big scam and a puppet show, and they've just given up hope.
It's like everything else. It's like Doge. It's like Schedule F. It's like USAID. It's like Liberation Day with the tariffs. It's like the war. Everything that this administration touches turns to shit because they have no idea what they're doing. They go in half-cocked, no plan, They don't have anybody plan it, review it. They don't go through the proper process. And what then invariably happens is that all of these policies.
I think it's because they were afraid to give the power to the people to solve these issues, and they wanted to make sure there was some administration or three-letter organization in charge of every little thing that happened.
Are immediately a catastrophic failure. Then there's a federal injunction. Simultaneously happen in every case. It's immediately a disaster. It totally fails. And then always there's a legal challenge that immediately shuts it down. It creates a major scandal for the administration because the policy is a disaster, turns public opinion not just against the specific implementation, but the policy in general. And then eventually the policy is overturned under public pressure or on the order of the Supreme Court. And this is what happened with the tariffs. Trump used emergency authority to put tariffs on every country. And what happened? Well, it was immediately a disaster. The bond market revolted. It looked like the U.S. was going to go through a recession. And within a week, they had to walk everything back. And then within a year, the Supreme Court overturned Trump's ability to use that emergency law to pass the tariffs, right? So they came in half-cocked, no plan, caused a catastrophe, turned public opinion against tariffs as a concept, and then the Supreme Court overturned it anyway a year later. And now we have to pay more money back in tariff revenue than we collected. Same thing with Doge. Elon came in.
It totally screwed us hard, too. And when Doge, yeah, like, don't even get me started on that. I was hyped for Doge. Everyone bought the entire plan, hook, line, and sinker. And as we watched it start to unfold, we realized it was all a sham, and people were in denial month after month, and then slowly people started flipping.
And with all of his people from PayPal and from Palantir and from SpaceX, and they start cutting everything. They start cutting all these agencies and personnel, and pretty soon there's disasters. With the nuclear arsenal, there's a complete disaster. With some of the regulatory agencies, now there's all these salmonella outbreaks. It turns public opinion against the policy. Now people hear Doge and they associate that with a bunch of kids running around, cutting things they don't really fully understand and causing a major lapse in government services, like paying government benefits or regulation or the nuclear arsenal. And then months later, the Supreme Court comes in and determines they never have the authority to fire some of these people or close some of these agencies. It's like with destroying the West Wing. Trump bulldozes the West Wing to build bulldozes the East Wing of the White House to build a ballroom, and only after they've destroyed the existing East Wing do they realize everyone hates it. And then the Supreme Court comes in and tells them you had no legal authority to do that in the first place. You have to rebuild it the way it was.
How much did they spend on that ballroom, I wonder? Comment below if you know.
Everything is like this. Doge, the border, the East Wing, the tariff schedule, the war in Iran. We go to war with Iran. It doesn't work. Oops, now the Strait of Hormuz is closed. Now we're running out of oil. Now gas prices are $5. Now we're trying to buy back all these long-term bonds. And it's the same story even with the voting.
A lot of the bonds we were forced to buy back because China held those bonds. They also held the power to determine when to sell those bonds if they held them after a certain time, and they held those bonds well after that period of time, and that allowed them to start selling them immediately whenever we went into the crypto bull run of 2024-ish, 2023, 2024, whatever, 25, whatever you want to call it. Kind of a lackluster bull run, in my opinion.
Election in 2020 was stolen because of in-person absentee voting, mail-in ballots. We have, in every cycle since, had this problem. And in spite of government control of half the states, in spite of Republican control over the House, the Senate, the White House, and the Supreme Court, we haven't done one serious thing about this. Haven't passed the SAVE Act, haven't changed regulations in most of the states. So here we are, a few months before the midterm elections. Since we haven't done anything else, we're going to just throw something at the wall and see what sticks. Let's try an executive order. Hey, man, I don't know. Let's count all the voters and let's just tell the letter carriers not to accept the ballots from people that aren't on the list. It doesn't even make any sense. That doesn't even sound right. Does that even sound legal? The federal government, how are they going to do this? They're going to create a list of every eligible voter? How are they going to do that? People die every day. People move every day. They change addresses every day. The state, an individual state, can barely keep track of that for its population. The federal government, they're going to evaluate 350 million people's voter eligibility and what address they have and whether they're alive and all these other things on a rolling basis. And then they're going to give that information to the notoriously reliable post office. They're going to give it to the post office. And what's going to happen there? It doesn't even make any sense. And so, to me, this is just the epitome of this entire administration from start to finish, which is the biggest missed opportunity in history. It's not that it couldn't have been done. It's that this guy can't do it. I've been trying to say this from the beginning. The problem is him. The problem is Trump. The things that he cares about get done. Look at all the bullshit that's been done to the White House. Look at the bullshit that's been done to the
Trump's problem is he wants too many professionals.
Oval Office. Putting gold decorations everywhere, and one of the replicas of the Declaration is hanging in the office, and then they put the patio where the Rose Garden was, and the helipad, and the race cars, and the UFC fight. And it's like, so some things can get done. What about the rest? Some things can get done. We can make $1 billion off cryptocurrency. We can make innovations in giving people alpha to trade on Polymarket through True Social at the cost of $100,000 per month. But where's the plan on immigration? Where's the plan on trade? Where's the plan on Iran? Where's the plan on voter ID? And you think that Trump had 4 years to get this together, 4 years since he left office, and basically limitless resources. You had Project 2025. You had a 93-page white paper. You had a personnel database. It could have been done. If you're Trump, you could have brought people in like the New Deal. It could have been like the Roosevelt administration. You won the popular vote, second time a Republican's done it this century. You won an electoral college landslide. It was utter domination. The left was routed.
And he botched it. He won in such a good way, and he had so many voters that would have done so much work for him across the country if he would have just gave people the freedom and the right and like the open source ability. Basically, people are so dumbed down, you have to tell them outright what they can do. And he didn't take the time to establish any of that to any of the public on, hey, go ahead and change the country in this way. Take it and go. Run with it, And it doesn't have to be a violent thing or anything at all like that, but it more motivates everyone to redirect in a certain way. Like, look, I need people out there building tech industries, motor industries, developing agriculture. We need people to do this. I create programs that'll fund you, and we'll use that government money for that instead. But first, I'm going to need you, the public, to go and enact all this stuff we need to do with like Doge, which they won't allow us to do it because it's all corrupted, and as soon as you go to do it, whoever's trying to do it gets a massive death threat. So we're going to have to hand it over to the public. All of you are going to have to go fix the problem because they can't take out all of you. If you really want the problem solved, this is where the problem is. Go get it. Like if they would just give it to us like that, we would fix these issues. But that's just a side note.
A supermajority on the Supreme Court. If Trump had balls, he could have gotten rid of the filibuster, brought together the think tank, and we really could have had a tariff schedule. We really could have had an immigration package. We could have done these things. It would have taken a little more time, but we could have done it. We could have made the Western Hemisphere a fortress. We probably could have had Greenland. We could have done all these things. We could have fired 50,000 government employees and filled it with Trump loyalists. We could have dissolved entire agencies and departments. Could have annexed Greenland, toppled Cuba, Venezuela. Could have had a tariff schedule with a 10, 15% global minimum and rebuilt industry in the country, reindustrialized, had charter cities. Could have had a border wall, could have had mass deportations, could have had nationwide voter ID. We could have done it all.
Coulda, woulda, shoulda.
Instead, we got Liberation Day, failure. Doge, failure. Epic Fury, epic failure. We got this bullshit, total disaster. It's like not even funny. It's a joke. They tried to obviously overturned, obviously, by his own judges that he appointed 6 years ago. These are just self-inflicted injuries, unforced errors. I told you it was going to be like this. I told you it was going to be exactly like this in 2024. And you know how I knew? It's because they threw out Project 2025. That's how I knew. And if you go back into the record, it was in June of 2024 when all this bullshit started, when Trump took the deal with Miriam Adelson, when he went on the All In podcast and promised them he was going to staple green.
Took $300 million, and as soon as he took that big fat check, everything changed.
Cards to diplomas. And it was in June of 24 when he disavowed Project 2025. And he said he much preferred AFPI. Fucking Brooke Rollins, that idiot. You know, Brooke Rollins is a complete idiot. She's at war right now with Susie Wiles. Brooke Rollins does not care about anything other than social media. That's all she cares about. Tag her. Tag Department of Agriculture and tag Brooke Rollins. All she cares about is social media. All she cares about is posting edits, posting bullshit on the Department of Ag social media pages. Why? So she could get Trump's attention so that she could get a better job. Yeah. She doesn't want to be the Secretary of Agriculture. She wants a bigger job. How does she do that? She wants to show off to Trump.
She's trying to work her way up the ladder.
By posting nonsense on social media, photo ops, edits. That's why she personally oversees everything that's posted there. That's what she cares about. And it was her at America First Policy Institute that was put in charge of the transition in a major way. You had AFPI and you had Project 2025 at Heritage. And there was a battle going on. Trump favored AFPI. But Project 2025, this was the better option. They had a personnel database, thousands of names of people that were based. They were the posters, our guys. They were going to run government. They also had a white paper. Here's 90 pages of how we're going to implement our vision. And Trump sided with AFPI because the liberal media shit all over Project 2025. And you remember they made that the villain of the 24 election cycle. And so once Trump shit on Project 2025 in favor of Brooke Rollins, that's when I knew it's going to be exactly like the first term. It's going to be a rerun because that's what happened in the first term. It was all these political considerations that came first. The loyalists were cast aside. The America First agenda was put on the back burner. And what took center stage was all the patronage. The spoil system, all of the favors that could be dispensed by Trump to these political people. That's what it became about. And so did we really think Kristi Noem was going to be the architect of mass deportations? No. Did we really think that Susie Wiles was going to be the architect? No. Pete Hegseth was going to fight and win a war with Iran? Yeah, that's hilarious. I mean, this is what we get. So Trump 2.0, it would have been better if it just simply never happened. Are you starting to see now why I wanted Kamala? You're seeing that Trump's failure is ruining it for all of us. It's not just like, hey, we took a swing and we missed. Ah, well, better luck.
Where I think Nick's going wrong is he wants either one of the politicians. He's still not seeing the big picture. Makes me think he's compromised. Nick, reach out to me if you're not compromised.
Next time, it's like we took a shot at the king, we missed, and now we're all going to get killed. You see, it's not like baseball where you get an bat, strike one, strike two, strike three, you're out. All right, get the next guy up. No, it doesn't work like that. No, Trump is striking out. It's making everyone hate being right wing. All the energy's moving away from us. We may never get another opportunity like this again. Whereas if Kamala had won, nobody would have supported her from the beginning. Her approval rating would have opened at 40%, fallen to 20%. She would have gotten stuck with the war in Iran. She would have gotten stuck with all the problems. We would have been fresh for 28 without this asshole casting a shadow over everything that we do on the right, sucking out all the oxygen. We would have been 4 years ahead of schedule. Now we're 4 years behind. That's Trump. He is, and not to sound like full TDS or whatever, but he is the problem. And I say this believing in the mission, believing in the message. Look, if he did what he said he would, it would have been great. We need a tariff schedule. We need hemispheric defense. I believe in that. We need a golden fleet. I want shipbuilding. I like the Golden Dome. We need missile defense. A $1.5 trillion investment wouldn't be the worst thing necessarily. We need a border wall, mass deportations, but he can't do it. He's just not the guy. We learned this the first time.
We need a lot more than that. We need to fix the country first.
And we also learned very quickly that it was going to be no different this time by how he behaved in the 2024 election. But some people need to see it to believe it. Now we're living through it. Now you have all these people like Mike Cernovich, so hilarious. Mike Cernovich was a DeSantis shill. We didn't forget. Then he was a Trump shill. Then he was all in on Trump 2.0. And now he's crying on his Substack. You know, we're just really disillusioned. These guys need to give us something. All of us that have been here from the beginning and had our lives ruined, these oligarchs need to do something for us. Well, with what leverage, Mike? With what leverage? You shilled DeSantis. You shilled Trump again. What are you talking about?
The only reason he was doing that is because he had retained a lot of his connections with the Trump administration through Alex Jones, because Alex Jones received some funding at one point too.
Anyway, so that's that. You know, these people like Doyle, I look at people like Doyle, and on some level, it's like, look, buddy, I get where...
Not the government Trump administration, but more of the family pre-government position.
I know where your heart is on this, but it's time to wake up and smell the coffee, bro. It ain't happening. I almost feel sorry for them, these people that were all in on the Trump coalition, voting Republican, still the most base thing we could do. Trump's our savior, whatever. It's like your heart's in the right place. I get what you're going for, but he's not the guy. It isn't happening. He's blowing it, and it's making it impossible to do what we need to do.
And it's frustrating a lot of people because we feel like we're running out of time.
It's this abusive relationship that they can't leave. So anyway.
All right, well, that was his take on how he feels about Trump, and I don't think any of it's gonna do any good for helping him out through the midterms. Comment below how you feel about it. Peace.